All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into something, well, pretty radical. It's a critique of addiction recovery that asks a tough question. What if the most common path to getting sober isn't a lifeline, but actually a cage?
And right out of the gate, the author throws this bombshell of a quote at us. It's meant to draw a really sharp line in the sand, right? A life after addiction versus a life spent forever in recovery. Two totally different things, according to this text.
So, just to be clear, our goal here is to simply break down the arguments in this text. And make no mistake, it sees itself as a direct challenge, a real attack on the philosophy of groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. We're here to unpack why it makes that claim.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The author's main target, it's aimed squarely at the core beliefs of the 12-step movement. You know, the approach that has really dominated recovery for decades.
So, the argument goes something like this. These programs, while they say they're helping, might actually be designed to trap people. How? Well, the text claims they use the shame from a person's past as a kind of leverage to keep them dependent on the group and the program.
So, what's the name for this core problem the author is pointing to? Well, they give this whole philosophy a specific name, and it's one that really hammers home that idea of being trapped. And that name is 12-step fatalism. This concept, it's literally the foundation for this entire critique.
Now, this definition is super important to get. It's the belief that your addiction isn't a problem you can solve and move on from. Nope. It's a permanent part of your identity that you can never, ever escape. You can only manage it forever.
According to the author, this whole idea of fatalism is held up by three main pillars. Think of them as mantras you hear all the time in recovery circles. The text argues that these ideas are what reinforce that feeling of being handed a life sentence.
And this quote, wow, it perfectly illustrates that second pillar. This idea that your addiction isn't just fading away while you're sober, oh no. It's out there, doing push-ups, getting stronger, just waiting. So if you were to relapse, it would be absolutely catastrophic.
And what's the result of that kind of thinking? Well, the text argues it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're constantly told your disease is getting stronger, you're basically being mentally set up to fail. That fear of this super-powered relapse, it just becomes too much.
Okay, so that's a pretty heavy critique. It naturally leads to the question, what's the solution then? And the author doesn't just, tear everything down without offering something else. They propose building a whole new model from scratch.
And that new model is called Solutions for Addiction, or SFA for short. The key thing to understand here is that this isn't just some slightly different version of the 12 steps. It's a total reimagining of what the end goal even is.
And just look at the language here. It's a huge shift. We're moving away from the idea of being in a constant state of recovering, like this endless process, and toward a final destination, being fully recovered. It's the difference between running a race with no end and actually crossing a finish line.
So what's really fascinating when you look at these solutions is how different they feel. They pivot away from the idea of powerlessness and lean hard into self-acceptance, into building a totally new life, one where addiction just isn't relevant anymore because you've accomplished the goal.
And here's a really cool core idea in SFA. It's all about reframing those things you were taught to see as character defects. So instead of being manipulative, maybe you're just smart. Instead of being compulsive, you're committed and driven. You're literally turning what was a source of shame into a source of personal power.
But wait, there's another layer to this. The author argues that even focusing on the addiction is kind of missing the point. They believe the addiction itself isn't the real problem. It's just a symptom, a sign of something much, much deeper.
And that brings us to what might be the most crucial point in the whole text. The argument is you'll never truly solve addiction if you don't heal its root cause. And what is that root cause? Well, according to this author, it's almost always the same thing.
And here it is. The book defines addiction not as some chronic disease, but as a coping mechanism, a way to deal with unresolved trauma. I mean, that completely changes the game, right? The focus shifts from managing a lifelong illness to healing a specific wound from the past. The logic is simple. Heal the trauma, and the addiction no longer has a job to do.
So the way the author pictures it is that this unhealed trauma literally splits a person in two. On one side, you have this wounded, traumatized inner child, kind of frozen in that moment of pain, and on the other side, you have the addicted adult. And that adult's addiction, it's really just a clumsy, desperate attempt to soothe that child's pain.
So if that's the problem, the solution has to be about bringing those two fractured pieces back together. The healing journey, as it's described, is all about the healthy adult learning to reparent that inner child, to finally give it the safety and validation it never got. And if you can heal that original wound, the theory goes, the addiction just falls away. It's no longer needed.
And all of this, all these ideas, they build up to one final, really provocative choice that the author puts in front of the reader. It's a choice between two totally different ways of seeing your future. On one hand, you have recovery, which the author frames as this kind of limited subculture existence where your identity is forever recovering addict. But on the other hand, there's life, where you move completely beyond that label, reintegrate into society, and just become a whole person again. And so, in the end, the author's conclusion is a powerful one. The path to being truly recovered, they say, isn't about surrendering to a higher power. It's about reclaiming your personal power. It's about finding that strength inside yourself.
And that really is the question this text leaves us with, isn't it? Is addiction a lifelong identity that you just have to manage forever? Or is it a problem that can be solved and eventually left behind? It's a massive challenge to one of the most basic ideas in modern recovery, and it forces us to ask, what is the real goal of this whole journey?